Welcome back. Today's interview is an exciting one. It is aimed specifically at what we're going to do on the backside of COVID-19 and going back into practice and when we start up again, and really in a poignant way addressing what it's going to be like to do business in this environment, but then also how do we lead our team through this? Absolutely love this interview. We've got more content like this coming, including we're doing an interview with a lender here pretty quick to clear up some misconceptions around all of these SBA loans and grants and all the information put out there. So hopefully by the end of this week, and hopefully it's not too late by then. That's the hard part with all of this. We've got some good info for you there. But this interview is with Joseph Grenny from VitalSmarts. He's one of the co-authors of Crucial Conversations, Crucial Accountability, Change Anything, and Influencer. All of them New York Times bestsellers. And I've been hearing Joseph speak through my dad's training and courses and through VitalSmarts videos for years now, since I was a teenager. And even in college, I got his phone number from my dad and interviewed him about what it's like to be a consultant, and was considering that as a career option. So it was a delight to have him on the show, and I think you guys are going to really enjoy this interview with Joseph Grenny. Okay, welcome to the Shared Practices podcast. I have with me today an extremely special guest that I've spoken with before in the past, and I've gotten to know indirectly through my dad's teachings and webinars and courses. We have with us Joseph Grenny from the book Crucial Conversations and the company VitalSmarts. Welcome, Joseph.
It's great to be with you, Richard.
Joseph has you've authored now 4 books. You're a co-founder of VitalSmarts. You're part of a group called The Other Side. Well, started a group called The Other Side that helps convicts who are getting back on their feet. And you're now helping people navigate and lead through this crisis. So thank you for everything you've done for leadership and for our industry. And it's an honor to have you on the show.
Well, thank you, Richard. And yeah, I don't think there's a time where the social sciences have a more important responsibility than right now. It's all about human behavior. So we're hoping to be of help.
Well, you wrote this interesting document, and I don't know where it came from or what inspired it, about the progression of reactions to our current crisis, and how this is all unbundling. So where did this come from for you? Was this something that just kind of struck you as you were seeing the reactions to everything that was going on?
Yeah, it was involuntary, so I can't help myself but think about these kinds of things. And particularly, as I said just a moment ago, that right now it's all about human behavior. And our background, our work is in the social sciences. And social sciences, very simply, are just about 2 things. Why are people doing what they're doing? And how can you help them change? Dentists are concerned with those questions too, because once they leave your office, their behavior affects the kind of health outcomes you're trying to help people to achieve. But right now, we're interested in it on a macro scale, and so I can't not think about these things.
So walk us through this. What are the phases? You laid out in this document some phases of reactions to the COVID crisis, starting with what we've been in up to this point, kind of pre-March.
Yeah, I kind of laid it out, looking both at what we know about the virus itself and about epidemiology, which is not my expertise, but what we know also about human behavior. It seems to me that 3 phases are inevitable. The first was the denial phase, and we all watched ourselves and others and some of our government leaders go through those phases. We thought this is just going to be a China problem, then maybe just an Iran problem, and then just an Italy problem. And pretty soon it became our problem. And now, as of when you and I are speaking today, we're watching it in New York City and seeing it start to approach Detroit and New Orleans and so on. And so, we're past the denial stage. The second stage is the containment stage, which is where the only value that we think about is our survival. And we're all willing to subject ourselves to some pretty extreme conditions to contain the virus if possible, and what we're calling flatten the curve. As I describe in the paper, I think that that's going to be a fairly short interval. We already hear conversation about moving into the third phase, which is compromise, that we're going to cut a deal with the virus, that we're going to say, yes, it's going to cost us. It's going to cost lives. Some of our loved ones will be lost. But there are other values at stake as well, like, for example, our economic values and quality of life and so on. And so people will have a limited willingness to endure the kind of deprivation that they have during the containment phase. Now, please don't hear me as advocating moving quickly to containment or to compromise. I'm not suggesting that's the right response. I think we ought to recognize that there's an epidemiological scientific argument for how that ought to play out, but I'm just looking at human behavior.
Right.
And so once we move into the containment or the compromise phase, the critical question for us as business owners, for dentists, is going to be, is this going to be post-epidemic, or will there be an ongoing pandemic? And the argument that I make in the paper is there's going to be a significant danger gap between when we start to reemerge socially and when vaccines are available. So there will be some period of time where there's an ongoing threat of pandemic. And you and I have to figure out, how do we do business in that environment?
So this is super interesting, and this resonated with me because as a profession, dentistry went through some very distinct phases of this, of, initially the denial of like, oh, this is a China problem. And then even when recommendations were put out by the American Dental Association and state boards, a lot of people were thinking this is going to blow over. I can continue to operate as normal. I'm not going to shut my office down. And state by state mandates started coming out where they said, hey, nothing but elective dentistry, no hygiene. You can't be doing anything that's non-essential. And many people have continued to interpret, essential, non-essential according to their own definitions for a period of time until states and governments have said, hey, no, this we are moving into the containment phase. And with the containment phase, then came a whole set of decision-making and leadership opportunities in the practice of having to decide, how am I going to create an environment where I can carry my business through this crisis and survive on the other end? And a lot of times that meant letting a team go, or laying people off, making really hard decisions, or trying to find some compromise in the middle. And so, we are in the heart of this containment. Across the nation, I would say 95% of dentistry is shut down right now. Offices are closed to anything but emergency. And even those, some people's definition of emergency is really like you have to be abscessing and not sleeping due to pain for the dentist to come in. So we're in that phase. And something I've been saying all along, like you were saying now, is, what is going to be the moment where we all collectively decide, okay, it's okay now. It's okay to do dentistry again. It's okay to be working in patients' mouths. It's going to be okay to expose ourselves to the risks of catching this. And what is that moment going to be? And I think the answer that you've already said is, there is not going to be some clear moment where all of a sudden we get all the green lights and there's no risk anymore and we can just go back to our lives as normal. Is that what I'm understanding?
That's exactly the case. And I think it doesn't take a sophisticated social science to realize that will be the case. So the president, as of today, this will be dated a few days from now, was saying
Right.
April 30th is going to be the benchmark. There is nobody out there that is saying that the virus is going to be completely contained or eradicated by April 30th. So what that means is, if I'm a dentist and I'm opening my practice again, let's say on May 15th, that I'm going to have to take some special precautions. My job is going to be to try to do two things. Number one, to say, how do I make sure my employees and customers are safe? But number two, how do I make sure my employees and customers feel safe? And those are two different problems. You've got to communicate to your patients that they are not going to be harmed by coming into your office. And you're going to have to solve both of those leadership problems if you're hoping to do business, probably until next spring or summer, when a vaccine is available and we can finally, hopefully, declare victory over this thing.
And there are a number of things, as people have been practicing on the tail end of this, have shut down and are thinking about what practice is going to look like on the back end. There are a number of measures that we can take to, number one, screen potential patients who've been exposed to COVID, who are confirmed COVID. Someone who is a known carrier of the disease should not be, in my opinion, in a dental office unless they have some dental emergency that would take them to the ER otherwise. And even then, you can kind of put some question marks around how you'd handle that situation. But intelligent screening, including screening out patients who are maybe at most risk and saying, hey, does it really matter that you come in for this cleaning, 2 months or 3 months from now, if they're a high respiratory risk patient who is above the age of 65 and has all these risk factors, screening out both patients who have COVID or potentially could have COVID, but also those who are at greatest risk of harm from it is step one. There are also a number of things in terms of all of the normal universal precautions we take. We can also have patients rinse with peroxide. We can use rubber dams for routine fillings. So, you put that little tarp on the patient's mouth and isolate only the tooth so that there's not a bunch of aerosols generated from their saliva. And in each office, it's going to be a different set of protocols to get yourself where you feel safe, you feel your team is safe, and you can communicate that to your patients. And that's going to have to be a journey to find that point in each office. The hard part, and the part that I've already struggled with, is that different people feel safe at different levels of exposure and risk. And some people don't want to be anywhere near a patient for months from now. They just want to climb in a hole and wait till it all blows over. So one thing I've struggled with is those conversations with team members who differ in what they think the measures should be than what I think the measures should be, or I think is reasonable, or the risk level that's acceptable to continue treating patients. So that was something I was really excited to talk to you about. How would you handle that situation where you've got a team member who they were okay with the risk of, Hep B or Hep C or AIDS or any of the other diseases that they could have gotten in the course of healthcare. But now at this point in time, they are not comfortable with the risk of COVID in your dental practice. How do I talk with that team member and where do I start?
Yeah, let me address that second. But first, I want to back up because you made comments about some of the known strategies that dentists can use to try to deal with potential infection in a laboratory in a treatment room setting. But what I'm trying to suggest is that if there's still sort of a pandemic psyche in the entire marketplace, even if your office is completely open and people can come freely in, they're gonna have the equivalent of PTSD as they do. They're gonna wonder when they take the pen to sign something if that's an issue. Can I sit in this chair? How close can I sit next to somebody? And so again, you have two jobs, not just to keep people safe, but to help them feel safe. And so you're going to need to think about what are some of the behavioral practices you'll have from all of your staff, including the front office staff, that are going to help people to feel safe when they're in your office. And that you're going to have to do at an impeccable level of practice for the next 12 months, at least. Now, if this becomes a seasonal virus and it takes a while and it continues to evolve so that it has an additive effect on mortality to the regular seasonal flu, then these are the kinds of practices that will just have to become normal. I've done a lot of consulting in the healthcare world, in hospitals and clinics, and we know that people are kind of sloppy frequently about some of those safety precautions. So never more than now will you have to have a culture of extreme accountability, where anyone can correct anybody about even the most modest kinds of violations of safe practices and safe perception practices. And so if you're the big shot, you're the owner of the practice, you've got to create an environment where they're going to call you on it, where you can't be sloppy. You've got to be the most vigilant of all, because this has to be a place of impeccable integrity. Again, everybody listening to this would say, well, we've always tried to do that. Well, we also know we always haven't tried as hard as we need to. We need to take it to the next level.
So anyone who denies that at some point during a hectic treatment day hasn't accidentally touched the wrong thing at one point in time with gloves on or gloves off is fooling themselves that like they're the perfect 100% PPE person that has a clean track record. In reality, even those of us who are trying to do our best fail occasionally. And this is a chance to reevaluate. And then I love what you said about empowering our team members to call us out on things. I'm an Army dentist who did the Army scholarship to pay for dental school. And the Army has a lot of protocols in place to make sure that every team member feels very safe in bringing up any safety concern, any patient care concern, to interrupt treatment. We role play interrupting treatment to go talk about something that the team member noticed, so they don't feel bad because they're not embarrassing the doctor in front of the patient. We have very specific timeout steps that we take before we operate on a tooth, and we have to go through all these check marks to ensure that we're doing absolutely everything we can, and we're eliminating as much human error as possible. And some people push back against that. For some people, that's very frustrating to have. Like, I'm
An
I know what I'm
underling.
doing. Yeah, well, it's like you're being forced to follow the rules to a T more than maybe some people even think is necessary.
Great point. Yeah.
And you might get some of that from your team. If you start to suddenly scrutinize things that weren't being scrutinized before, they're going to say, "Hey, what's the big deal? We did this this is how we did it before. Why can't we continue to operate this way?"
Yeah. Well, so let me share this as we start moving towards this next part that you were proposing. Well, our central finding about organizations over the past 30 years is that you can measure the health of teams, relationships, and organizations by looking at one simple thing. And that is the lag time between when people see it and when they say it. Period. So you think about your personal relationships. If you've got a relationship where when people feel they have a concern and it takes a long time to bring it up, the kind of mischief and problems and irritations and politics and mistrust that happens when it takes a long time. The same is true in organizations. If you've got an organization where it takes a long time for people to point out an error, a flaw, an omission, or a risk that you're putting a patient to, then you're not utilizing the full intellectual resources of that organization or of those individuals. Now, you take it to the immediate moment. What we know is that the level of rigor, the level of impeccability in maintaining cleanliness and safety standards for patients is fundamentally a function of whether your highest value is truth or power. And you only get to pick one. If the highest value is power, which means if I'm the dentist, if I'm the one that owns the practice, I get to decide how I behave and don't challenge me on it. If you even for a moment telegraph that that's your highest value, you've screwed truth. Then truth is no longer the dominant value. And what people will do is calculate, is this a truth or power moment? And generally, they're going to default to saying, I'm just not going to say anything because I got my head bit off last time I corrected somebody about this. Right. You have to go over and beyond to let people know the only thing that matters here is not my ego. It's not my position. It's not anybody else's title or power in this organization. It's keeping patients safe. And you have to be willing to be challenged and have everybody else challenged at every moment in time. If you do that, then you'll succeed in creating a place that is both safe and looks safe and feels safe to your patients. And you'll be able to start prospering far sooner.
That, I feel like that is a culture that has to be put in place over time, demonstrated over time, and can be broken pretty quickly.
No question.
When you have one power moment over a truth
moment. That's exactly right. And people generally suspect that they know it's all about power, not about truth. When they come in, that's their default assumption, is that, I know how the world works, and the people that have the power use it to their own benefit. And so you have to go over and beyond, just as you're saying. And if there's even a single lapse, you have to so over-respond to that, overcompensate for that afterwards with apologies, with recognition, with pleading for forgiveness, that it's not even worth a single lapse.
Well, and that takes a great deal of humility. Like, you have to truly believe this to be able to communicate it. And that's the hardest part, is that you have to truly value, hey, I think everyone here has a perspective, has a knowledge base, has an experience set that I want to know about, and I want to see what you see and realize what you realize. You really have to care what your team thinks about. You can't fake this. You can't just put on a facade of like, okay, I want everyone to feel safe, so I'm going to say the right things so that people feel safe.
Yeah, you have to do, and that's why I love your examples from the Army. that you have to almost create dress rehearsals where people practice speaking up and challenging one another. And here's what it's going to sound like. You say it to me right now. And it can feel infantile to do that. But I'm telling you, you're fighting against both genetic programming and cultural programming that causes people to defer to those that they perceive as having power. And if that's the case, you're dead. Over the next year, the prized cultural value in any dental office that's going to prosper is going to be a culture that's about truth, not power. When we're making sure the patients both are safe and feel safe is absolutely essential. I just give you a quick example. Before you and I sat down here, I ran some dry cleaning over. And the dry cleaner is all shut down on the retail space. You have to pull up to the outside and they pick up your bag. And so I thought, what a wonderful thing that they're going to this kind of care. So the woman comes out to pick up their dry cleaning and she says, yeah, it's now 2-day turnaround, not 1-day turnaround, because we have to let it sit for a day because we're taking special precautions. But while she's saying this, she's handling the package with her bare hands. And so there's that little lapse. And in my mind as a customer, suddenly I don't feel safe because her hands touched that and now mine touched that. And so I'm going to go in the car and I'm going to sanitize myself. And we're going to be hyper vigilant for many months into the future as a consequence of what's going on now. So this is both about being safe and also about feeling safe and telegraphing to your patients that once they cross the threshold of your door, they're in great hands. And if you don't have a culture where everybody can challenge anybody about little violations, you're going to suffer for it.
No, absolutely. So it's an extreme leadership challenge to do that, but we're in a situation where you have to step up to that challenge really quickly. So if you haven't created that culture up to this point, it's a great opportunity to do so right now.
And let me give you one other advantage to this, because there's sort of a hidden opportunity in this moment. What we know from 30 years of research on effective organizations is what we're describing, creating a culture based on truth, not power, one where anyone can challenge anyone if it gets in the way of us achieving our mission. That has always been one of the most prized values of any high-performance organization or high-performance team. So the dentists listening to this that haven't gone to the trouble of creating that kind of a team culture, you've already been paying for it in sloppy management practices, in waste, in lost fees, in rework, in a whole variety of ways that you've already been paying because people are not challenging one another to be at their best. And so the fact that right now we have an opportunity and a moral imperative to try to ratchet up our game in this respect will pay dividends financially and in terms of customer retention and in terms of treatment quality and every dimension that you care about for years to come.
That's fantastic. So I love reframing this as a true opportunity to root out something that we've probably been struggling with for a long time. Now let's make the switch.
Absolutely is.
So I guess there's two tangents that I want to go on, and you can let me know if we can move on from this or
Sorry, I keep pulling you back.
No, this is why I love podcasts. How would you do that? How if you don't have this in your office, what would be the meeting or the conversation? How do you set the standard for your team that, hey, this is from this point on, we're doing this differently? And how would you reset your culture around truth versus power?
Yeah. There are 4 practices that are absolutely essential. You don't get to pick between them. You have to do them all. They are teach, model, praise, and own. Teach, model, praise, and own. So the first is you have to teach it because people don't come having known how to do this. Every other organization or every other social system that your employees have been in, they've been taught to defer to the people that have the power. And religious organizations, that's the kind of habit that we develop. Our schools, that's the habit that we develop. You don't sass back to the teacher and, the
Especially
military.
In the Army.
What's that?
I was going to say our rank structure in the military, I think that's
Absolutely.
why we've had to fight it so much in our medical system is because we have such a power structure defaulted into how we interact with each other.
That's absolutely right. So a really inexpensive way of doing this is to start instituting half an hour brown bag lunch once a week where you, the dentist, the power person in the office, teaches this. Get copies of the book, get copies of Crucial Conversations, get copies of Crucial Accountability. Just have them read a chapter a week and have a little brown bag discussion around it. It's a very cheap investment, but it'll pay dividends on every one of the performance dimensions that we described. So model it as next. You've got to show it. You've got to be the one that challenges people, points out things when they need to be done, but also that praises those. That's the third step, that challenge you. In fact, you probably ought at the end of every day to say, I want everybody to point out something I did wrong today. And give them a chance to prime that pump, to show that it's okay. And then you listen to it. You take notes about things you want to fix or that they want you to fix. Have them express their gripes to you. And trust me, in any dental office, there are gripes. There are things they wish you would change about how you do things. And so you can model that truth is more important than power by just every single day taking that feedback yourself. And then finally, owning. So if you have a track record of probably saying, hey, I'm the big shot here, and I get some special allowances that nobody else gets, you ought to start this whole process by owning that, by recognizing your own fallibility, by recognizing the hypocritical messages you may have sent in the past. And the dividends you'll reap if you do this is that you're going to get the heart and soul of every one of your employees at a level that you've never had before.
Awesome. Fantastic. No, I love that. Okay, let me try and say this off real quick. So teach, there was praise and there was own. I'm missing one.
Model.
Yep. Teach, model, praise, own.
Yep.
Okay. Well, so now we're stepping up the steps that we're taking to make sure that our team and our patients feel safe. We've created a new culture in our office. Now we're going to butt heads about some of the specifics and the comfort level of treating it all, of coming in at all. How, if you're okay, can we move on to that conversation?
Yes, let's do.
No,
that's great. Never ask.
I'll take more tangents. I'll take them all. How do you have that conversation with a team member who says, even though we're doing all these things, I don't feel comfortable treating patients in this situation. Yeah. Whether you disagree about the measures, whether you disagree about seeing patients at all, do we open our doors on this day versus 2 weeks from now, versus a month from now, versus 2 months from now?
Yeah.
Where do we start with that?
Yeah. So your job in that conversation with your staff is to make sure they feel safe. And one of the fundamentals to people feeling psychological safety is knowing they have autonomy, that you respect their autonomy, that they're an adult that's going to make an adult decision. And so in the chapter in Crucial Conversations we call State My Path, one of the principles we teach is that the more your motive is to convince, the less convincing you become. The more you try to convince people, let's get this office open, it's perfectly safe, all of your concerns are really not well-founded, the more you start trying to take that aggressive tone with people, the more they're going to dig into the concerns they have, because now they feel both psychologically threatened by you and threatened by the virus. And so you've just created a whole new problem. So knock it off. Don't do that. You've got to come into the conversation completely honoring the fact that these are adults who need to make decisions, and start off with that as your opening line to say everybody's got to make their own decision about what the best timing is and when conditions are best. My job as a leader in this office is to make sure it's as safe as possible as soon as possible. And that's what I'm going to do, and I need your help doing it. Even with that said, everyone's got to make their own decisions. So let's talk. And now you can open it up and you can talk about where the virus is and the precautions you're going to take. And then at the end of it, let people know they've got options. One is, to wait a little bit longer. If they wait too long, we may need to try to replace you. That's just an adult decision I'll need to make. And I'm not doing it because I don't want you to come back. You got to make sure you're not doing it from a coercive perspective. You're doing it because you have interests just as they have interests. And everybody has the right and obligation to protect their own interests. And so have that kind of open dialogue and let them express their concerns, try to find solutions and accommodations, and then at the end of the day, honor what they decide to do. And then you got to be a big boy or a big girl and figure out how to go do business with however many people are willing to show up at that time.
And that right there, I wish that was the default for people, that we just naturally could have a conversation like that. But it's not. I feel like the default is to switch into coercion or frustration or guilt tripping or, power plays in politics. How I guess this is all of crucial conversations. So, this is the skill of having these difficult conversations when it matters most. What are some things that someone can do before that conversation to prepare for that?
Yeah, one of the most important is to stop and answer the question, what do I really want? It's to get your motives right. So let me step back and just share one principle. What we know is that the quality of a crucial conversation depends on how psychologically safe the participants feel, period. And they feel safe when they believe that the other party, number one, cares about their interests, problems, and concerns, and number two, respects them. So if there's a feeling of mutual purpose and mutual respect, people feel safe and they feel liberated to talk and be open about their concerns and fears and kind of work their way through all of that. If they don't, if they feel that all you care about is your interests, problems, and concerns, that's when they become defensive and combative or move to silence and pretend like they agree, but then they're going to leave the office and jump onto monster.com and find another job and screw you as quickly as they can. That's when all that stuff starts to happen. So your number one job is to make sure they feel psychologically safe. The only way you can help them feel that you care about their problems, interests, and concerns is if you really do. If you really do respect that they have legitimate fears and legitimate problems and financial stresses and so on. And so one of the best preparations for a crucial conversation is to stop and write down on a piece of paper, what do I really want at 3 levels? What do I want for me? What are my interests? What are my problems? What are my concerns? What do I want for them? What do I want for each of my employees? Be sure you answer that in a quality way, trying to empathize with what they would want you to want for them. And then finally, what do I want for the relationship? How do I want the relationship to be between me and them? If you get yourself anchored into that kind of broader motive set, you tend to be less likely in the moment to feel threatened and run to survival yourself. To just be worried about, I've got to get this practice open and it's all about me. Because as soon as it becomes all about you, you alienate people. They start to feel unsafe, and then you'll have no persuasive power at all. So there's really 2 reasons to ask that question. One is the mercenary reason, and I hope nobody gets persuaded by that one. The mercenary reason is if you don't do it, your conversation won't work well. You'll be less persuasive and less likely to have them hear your arguments. The second reason to do it is because it's what decent human beings do. And hopefully that's the persuasive reason to do it, but it also works better.
Right. So the reason that you're going through this activity even matters. How much your heart is in this process of what do I want? What do I want for them? What do I want for a relationship? Your heart has to be there, and that has to translate to the conversation.
Yeah.
So now if we've done that homework, we've prepared for that, we come into the conversation, and some of the things you said right there, let me try and practice some of them back, and I'm gonna butcher them. So I apologize to you see your principles so butchered here, but so number one was I want to make sure that your ability to make this decision and do what you feel is best for you is respected. So I care not only about our ability to provide care for our patients, but I also care about the things that you care about. And you have the ability to make a decision. And that decision is either to come practice or to not practice. And I respect that there's a lot of factors that go into that. And I want you to be able to reach the decision that's right for you. And then we'll have to figure out if that decision doesn't line up with what our timeline with the practice, we'll have to figure out how we're going to cover and move forward as an office. But ultimately, you have agency. You have the ability to choose and to do what you believe is right for your situation. Okay, so critique me on that. I feel like I was stumbling through it, and
no, I think if I was trying to imagine myself being a dental assistant and hearing my boss say this, and that would set me so much at ease. It isn't about being word perfect; it's about being soul perfect. It's about expressing the right kind of motives that help people understand that you really and truly care. Now, again, back to the own part of what we described in changing the culture of your practice. If you have a track record of being pretty self-centered and it's been all about you and maximizing what you bring home and trying to squeeze them down to the lowest dollar or whatever kind of behaviors you might have, you got to start by eating some crow and saying, I haven't always been the best boss, but now is a time where I need to be and I want to be. And I want things to be different in the future, not just so we can get the practice open, but you can't create safety if you haven't deserved their trust in the past.
So, okay, so this is great. We've set the stage. We're talking about these big things. Some little things are going to come up where someone is like, well, I don't want to see patients unless I have an N95 mask and I can switch them between every patient. And I've got a face shield and I've got disposable PPE and the full hazmat suit, um, which may or may not be appropriate. If you're treating a COVID patient in your dental office, my opinion is that a N95 mask is appropriate and is what you should be doing. Um, However, at a certain point, the hospitals aren't able to even have an N95 mask for every single patient throughout every single day of everything that's going on. We can't buy them. We've attempted to order, we've looked, we've searched, we've gone through different avenues, and so now we're at a spot where we say yes, we would like to have this, but because of these reasons, that may not be feasible. And having a conversation with the team member, this is I'm not making this up. This is a really specific conversation that I'm trying to get through right now. How could I be more skillful in how I'm talking about that?
Yeah. So first, let's deal with the two different parts of this. There's the perceived safety, and then there's actual safety. So it could be that some of your staff are saying that they won't feel safe until the practices you're using are so far beyond what is actually required that it becomes prohibitively expensive or just unattainable. If that's the case, remember the principle we began with. If you resist it, it'll persist, it'll deepen. So don't argue against them. Don't try to talk them into it. They're going to be suspicious of you because you have an economic incentive, a huge one, to try to get them to stay there and start billing again. And so it's critical in moments like that to step back and not go into a convince mode. The more convincing you try to be, the less convincing you actually will be. So instead to say, these seem like legitimate concerns. If you have concerns about your safety, I want us to be doing everything that's humanly possible to maintain your safety and that of the patient. So let's get a couple members of the team. I've already reviewed the data. I think that I have an opinion, but I want to make sure that others have a chance to scrutinize it as well. I want you to go look at best practices, compare to a couple of other offices, and look at what the standards are out there, and then come back and make those recommendations. Would that be reasonable? So what I've done now is taken it off of, do we need N95 masks every time, and tried to just get to the principle of, we're going to use science-informed best practices for maintaining safety. And hopefully what happens is I don't create psychological threat for them by trying to convince them, but give them a chance to go convince themselves that they're really okay. So that's number one. That's the perception part. The reality part, if there's a gap between what those best practices should be and what equipment is available, well, then you are asking them to take risk. And you've got to be upfront about that. You need to be honest to say, yes, we don't have the equipment to do this the best way possible. And so at the end of the day, each of us has to make our own decision about whether we're willing to take the risk to be able to provide the patient care that we want to provide and to get our job started again. And I have no, there's nothing else I can say about it other than that. It's just the truth.
No, absolutely. And providers at the hospital level are making that decision all the time.
Exactly
the nurses and the physicians on the front lines, they are, a homemade mask sometimes and versus nothing versus not being able to see patients is the decision they're having to make, which is an awful decision to have to be in. But ultimately, like you said earlier, everyone can make that decision for themselves.
That's right.
And I need to get away from the convincing and
yeah, just put it out there. Let them make an adult decision and let their own motivations drive it. And while the dentists and the other healthcare providers are making the extreme version of that trade-off right now, everybody in employment position, including the dry cleaner that I just interacted with, are making that same decision as well. There's more risk for her standing there taking people's bags, but she stepped back, she assessed risk as a human being, and she said, I'm willing to do this. People do that. We do it all the time.
Right. Well, I had one last conversation that I think would be really interesting to explore before we wrap this up, which was, what if we've got the other side of this scenario where we have a family member or someone who's at risk who is taking a lot of risk right now when a lot of people are trying to lower that risk, and someone who is either of age and is elderly and in their 70s or who has recent cancer treatment or high cardiovascular risk of infection. And that person is not taking this seriously in the same way that many people are in businesses and the government are taking it. How do you have that conversation with someone that you care about that you're really worried? I mean, every single day, every time you avoid interacting with this person in person so that they don't be exposed, so they aren't exposed, and yet they're going out and interacting with friends and going shopping and doing things that you disagree with.
Yeah, there are two principles that I try to live by in this domain. Number one, to make sure that I honor boundaries. And one of those boundaries is I'm not responsible for their life. They are. And as soon as you start making yourself responsible for the emotional well-being, the physical well-being, the psychological well-being of people around you, you become a monster. You start to become a control freak and a critic and judgmental, and you alienate them. You have less influence. So number one is swallowing hard, and it's hard to do. My own father's not taking as many precautions as I wish he did right now. And I have to get to the point where I say he's an autonomous human being, and I respect that. And he may do something that he will die of. And I need to be okay with that. I need to be okay. I will grieve it. It will hurt me, but I need to understand that that's where that decision power lies. Second, I have a responsibility as an independent human being to share information that I think somebody ought to hear. But you always do that by asking permission. You respect their autonomy and their boundaries by saying, hey, I've noticed some things that have got me quite concerned. Can I share that? Is it okay if I'm pretty blunt with you about this? When you do that, 99% of the time, people will feel where you're coming from, and they'll give you that permission. And then unload on them. Let them know. But don't do it from a perspective of trying to convince and control them. Your job is just to be sort of the prophet for them, right? It's to let them know, I see this future for you. And here's why I see that future. And try to lay out the information as best you can, and then step back into your own body and let them make their choices in life, realizing that you'll have feelings about it. And that's okay.
No, I love that. And I think there's so much work to be done on both sides of that, of coming to this from the right place and caring about them, but not in a way that is controlling or overbearing, and really asking permission. I love that. One specific thing is, is it okay if I share with you some of the things that I'm seeing?
Absolutely. And people feel safe with you when they can feel from you that you appreciate their autonomy, that you respect them as an independent adult. Now, probably long before COVID, my father had this habit of leaving his garage door about 2 feet open at the bottom. I think he thought it was recirculating air or something like that. He lives in a 55 plus community that's a target for people to come in and burglarize. And so here he is with the garage open, and then the door to his house, accessing his house wide open. And so I came in one day and I said, Dad, I'm really concerned about something. Can I tell this to you? Can I let you know something that's got me really, really scared? And he said, sure, son. And I let him have it because I told him 3 times that this was a risk. And he started closing that door. But the psychological agreement you make when somebody gives you permission to give them feedback changes the texture of that conversation.
That's fantastic. Well, I want to wrap this up. This has been a phenomenal conversation. If people want to learn more about how to lead through a crisis, how to lead through COVID, I've given a specific link to a webinar. By the time this airs, the first webinar will have already occurred. But you have put together a resource. Tell us about what you're doing right now.
Yeah, so we've created a series of 5 webinars on how to lead through this kind of crisis, but far beyond it. How to create a culture that's going to be resilient for many months afterwards as the ongoing pandemic affects us. And so we encourage people to use that link, take advantage of that. We encourage people to get copies of the book and to start the learning process, because once again, I think it's Paul Romer, the Nobel laureate, who said, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. This crisis is an opportunity for you to develop the kind of rigor in your culture that will help you financially, will help with patient care, will help you with morale in the office for many months to come if you develop a place where it's more about truth and power.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show, for building VitalSmarts and Crucial Conversations, and the impact that it's had on my life, my dad's life. We've had many crucial conversations, and we've had some on the show here, and he's shared the impact that this resource has had on himself personally, and then also all those professionally he's been able to help. So Thank you for coming on the show,
My
Joseph.
pleasure. And your father is one of the great men that I admire. So it's great to be here with you too.
Well, thank you. I'll be sure to pass that along, and I really appreciate it all. Take care. We'll see you.
Take care, Richard.
Once again, I'm always blown away by interviews like this where we think we know a lot. We think, maybe we don't have a lot to learn. And then someone like Joseph comes along and turns everything upside down and reframes like, okay, how are we looking at this? How are we leading our teams? And I thought there was a ton of really applicable actions here in terms of creating this culture where absolutely anyone can voice their opinion, can stand up for what they're seeing, and creating an environment where both our teams and our patients feel that we're doing everything we can to mitigate risk. And communicating that and demonstrating that is going to be vital. And then having hard conversations around all of these things when we don't agree, or when we have to move forward with things. And I love that he said not convincing people is one of the best ways, not trying to be persuasive, because as soon as you're trying to convince someone else, they're on the defensive, you're on the aggressive, and dialogue really shuts down. So I absolutely buy the books. Reach out to us if you thought this was useful. And more relevant content coming soon around SBA lending and grants. And like I said, hopefully it's not too late. But we will talk with you next time on the Shared Practices podcast.